Chapter 1, Section 3, Colonial Rights and the Growth of Self-Government. In 1744, a doctor touring the colonies wrote of dining at a tavern with a very mixed company of different nations and religions. There were Scots, English, Dutch, Germans, and Irish. There were Roman Catholics, Churchmen, Presbyterians, Quakers, New Lightmen, Methodists, Seventh-day Men, Moravians, Anabaptists, and one Jew. Hamilton's Itinerarium, being a narrative of a journey from May to September 1744. For all the differences observed by the doctor, these people shared a deep attachment to their rights and freedoms. The Rights of Englishmen. For the majority of colonists, the idea that people were entitled to certain rights and freedoms was rooted in English history. They trace that idea back to the signing of the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, in 1215. This agreement between King John and his rebellious barons listed rights granted by the king to all the freemen of our kingdom. Some of these rights establish a system of justice based on due process of law. Under such a system, a government cannot deprive a person of life, liberty, or property except according to rules established by law. Furthermore, the king agreed to make no special demands for money without the consent of his barons. This provision later led to the establishment of a legislature, a group of people chosen to make laws. This English-making body was called Parliament. The Magna Carta also laid the foundation for the principle that people cannot be taxed except by their representatives in the legislature. Most importantly, the agreement made it clear that the monarch was not above the law. In contrast, rulers elsewhere typically had unlimited power over their people. Over time, the rights of Englishmen were expanded, but not without conflict. One such conflict was a bitter struggle between King James and Parliament for control of the English government. In 1688, the king was forced to flee England after a bloodless change of power called the Glorious Revolution. The throne was offered to a Dutch prince, William of Orange, husband of Princess Mary of England. Parliament then enacted the English Bill of Rights, which further limited the power of the monarch. Passed in 1689, this act confirmed that the power to tax rested only with Parliament. The act set forth individual rights, including the right to have a trial by jury and to petition the government for redress of wrongs. It also protected English citizens from cruel and unusual punishments. The right to self-government. English colonists brought these ideas about good government with them to America. Separated from England by 3,000 miles of ocean, they needed to make laws suited to life in the colonies. At New England town meetings, for example, townspeople got together to discuss local issues and solve problems by themselves. Such meetings helped lay the early foundations for self-government in the colonies. Over time, each colony elected a legislature. The first was Virginia's House of Burgesses, formed in 1619. The colonial legislatures were hardly models of democracy, for only white male landowners could elect representatives. In many colonies, a person had to own a certain amount of property in order to vote. Nevertheless, the legislatures reflected a belief in self-government. These assemblies also affirmed the principle that the colonists could not be taxed except by their elected representatives in the legislatures. For the colonists, self-government was local, with each colony operating independently of the others. In fact, the colonies were reluctant to work together even to face a common threat. In 1754, after war broke out in the Ohio Valley over rival French and British claims to land, Benjamin Franklin drafted the Albany Plan of Union. It proposed a confederation or alliance of the colonies for their own defense. The idea was as old as ancient Greece, and Franklin could also point to an alliance of 6 American Indian tribes known as the Iroquois League. Tribal representatives met as a ground council to make laws, settle disputes, and plan military strategy. However, Franklin's plan for colonial Grand Council with the powers to tax and raise an army was quickly rejected. Parliament saw a colonial confederation as a potential threat to its authority, and the colonies were unwilling to pursue the matter. Seeking freedom of religion. Although colonists shared a belief in their right to self-government, they were divided by religion. In the early 1600s, the government of most countries saw religious diversity as a danger. The Puritans were not the only people who came to America to escape harassment in England for their unorthodox beliefs. Religious persecution also led to the founding of Maryland as a haven for Catholics and Pennsylvania as a refuge for Quakers. Some colonies, such as New Jersey and Pennsylvania, had more religious diversity than others. Experience with religious persecution did not, however, lead to tolerance. Although the Puritans sought religious freedom for themselves, they refused to grant it to those who did not share their beliefs. In 1635, Puritan leaders in Massachusetts banished Roger Williams, a preacher, for holding new and dangerous opinions. Williams went on to found the colony of Rhode Island, where he welcomed colonists of all faiths. He firmly believed that freedom of religion, which he called liberty of conscience, was compatible with law and order. To make his point, Williams used the example of a society aboard a ship at sea. There goes many a ship to sea with Papists, Catholics, and Protestants, Jews and Turks, Muslims. I affirm that all the liberty of conscience that ever I pleaded for turns on these two hinges, that none of the Papists, Protestants, Jews, or Turks be forced to come to the ship's prayers or worship, nor compelled, kept from their own particular prayers or worship. If they practice any, I further add that I never denied that, notwithstanding this liberty, the commander of this ship ought to command the ship's course, yea, and also command that justice, peace, and sobriety be kept and practiced, both among the seamen and all the passengers. Roger Williams, Letter to the Town of Providence, 1655. Elsewhere, religious prejudice was slow to fade. When Quakers came to Virginia, the House of Burgesses tried to drive them out by making it illegal to be loving to Quakers. In 1649, the proprietor of Maryland tried to end quarreling between Catholics and Protestants by enacting the Act of Religious Toleration. This law declared that no Christian could be in any way troubled because of practicing his or her religion. However, it did not apply to non-Christians. Indeed, Jews suffered from prejudice in most colonies and generally did not have the right to vote or hold office, but they were usually allowed to worship and work in peace. The right to free expression, the Zenger trial. Governments on both sides of the Atlantic also feared freedom of expression. Even though colonies had their own legislatures, they were also subject to rule by governors appointed by the king. Following English practice for royal officials, these governors did not support freedom of expression. In the colonies, newspaper publishers who criticized governors risked being jailed. In their defense, publishers argued that there can be no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. In 1734, John Peter Zenger, a New York printer, was arrested for publishing seditious libels, rebellious statements that are false or damaging, about the governor of New York. At the trial, the judge instructed the jury to consider only whether Zenger had published the damaging remarks without regard to their truthfulness. Zenger's attorney, Andrew Hamilton, asked the jury to consider whether the remarks were true, arguing that a free people should have a right publicly to remonstrate against the abuses of power in the strongest terms. The jury found Zenger not guilty, and he was freed. The verdict in the 1735 Zenger trial helped promote the idea that the press should have the freedom to print the truth, and that this freedom is a right that should be protected. The right to think freely, the Great Awakening. The Zenger trial took place during a period of religious revival known as the Great Awakening. Beginning in the 1730s, traveling preachers toured the colonies, attracting huge crowds to their emotional gatherings. Critics of this revival declared that the preachers were encouraging disrespect for the established church and her ministers. They were right. As historian Curtis Nettles observed in 1963, the Great Awakening popularized the idea that the truth was to be found by each person in the Bible, not in man-made laws, sermons, or creeds. Authorities who violated the divine law did not merit respect. Here were the seeds of revolution. Although the Great Awakening was concerned mainly with spiritual matters, it had a broader impact, as Nettles suggests. It encouraged people to question authority and think for themselves. One revival preacher proclaimed, "The common people claim as good a right to judge and act for themselves in matters of religion, as civil rulers or the learned clergy." As the colonists became more comfortable thinking freely about religious matters, they would also begin to think and speak more freely about political matters.